Well, welcome. Super glad you guys are here. How many of you are loving this like changing weather right now? Yeah, me too. Yeah, weather changing and getting nicer is always a good thing. It was a long winter. So for those of you who don't know me, I like to always just introduce myself because I'm kind of a Kermit over there on normal Sundays, just sitting over there by myself. I'm Kevin Slaba. I'm the youth pastor here. If you've never got a chance to meet me, I get the privilege of working with the youths here. It's a pretty awesome gig. So before I get into like our main meat of this message this morning, I just wanted to just share. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this Galatians series. I know I'm learning a ton as Rod and Nate and even Silas have unpacked some pretty awesome scriptures. I can now relate to Rod and Nate when they come in and say we have about 30 scriptures to cover this morning, so strap it on. I kind of felt the weight of that this week, so I now can sympathize with them. So this morning we're actually going to just continue this, and we're going to be in Galatians 4 if you want to turn there, 8 through 20. As you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll dive in here. So, Father God, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for the beautiful weather and for this place to gather in your name and to learn a little bit more about you. God, I pray that your message would be heard, and Lord, that there would be life change as we leave this place. And it's for your beautiful name we pray. Amen. All right, so before I get into this, I need to know how many people in here have a dog or dogs. Anybody? Raise your hand. Not many in first service did. We have some in here. Okay, go ahead, Brian, and put up this picture. My wife and I have a dog. This is Luna. And we're totally not people that pay to get our dog's picture taken. We just have a sister who is a photographer, but we are those people. So, this is our Luna, and I got to surprise Brittany a couple Christmases ago with her. She had no idea, and I won Christmas that year hands down. Like, it wasn't even close, but that's not important right now. What is important is it didn't take me super long to realize that when we first got her as a puppy, I was kind of a helicopter dog dad. If there's parents in here, you can maybe relate, like your first kid or whatever. I super fast became a helicopter dog dad. And what I mean by that is it didn't take long before I was like calling. I think Brandon got a lot of texts from me because he's got some vet background experience. I was talking to Marge a ton because she knows pug life. She understands pug life. And so like it quickly became like a lot of concerns for me. And that also comes with my personality type too. So I was constantly thinking, is she supposed to smell like this? Like her poop is just a little soft. Like, is that okay? How many times are we supposed to bathe her? Her nails are getting really long. Am I okay doing this, or should I pay a professional to do it? Her ears kind of stink. What does that mean? And so Marge is laughing because she's pretty much answered all these questions for me. So I share that. As funny as it is to share that, I definitely had concerns with our Luna, but it eventually it scaled down a little bit, thankfully. But as we're about to read this morning, Paul too had some pretty big concerns, and actually a lot bigger concerns than mine with my dog. But that's where we're kind of going to be this morning. He's going to outline some concerns for this church in Galatia. And so if you'll turn there, we're going to be in 4 verses 8 through 20. And so last week, if you guys were here, you probably heard Nate share something along the lines of these people that Paul went to, they turned from slaves to sons. And this morning we're going to talk about how they've made kind of a switch back from sons to slaves. So we're going to take a look at this, but really quickly before we do, I just kind of want to outline kind of what we're going to do with our chunks of scripture this morning. So Paul kind of gives 2 sections here. 8 through 11 is our first section, so we're going to read, and then I'll give you some nuggets of wisdom, and then we're going to pick it up in 12 through 20, and also read some more. But you kind of see 2 things happening here. At this first section, you see Paul with some major concerns, and as I like to say, he's about to like give a spiritual spanking, kind of. So he's got some big concerns here for this church in Galatia. And then in part 2, we kind of see his appeal and his change in tone And that's where I like to say he kind of changes and transitions into like a spiritual hug, if you will. And so that's where we're going to be this morning. So if you want to go ahead and turn there, verses are going to be up here if you don't have a Bible. Let's just check out 8 through 11 real fast, then we'll talk for a little bit. So Galatians 4, 8 through 11 says, "Before you Gentiles knew God, you were slaves to so-called gods that did not even exist. So now that you know God, or should I say, now that God knows you, why do you want to go back again to becoming slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? You're trying to earn favor with God by observing certain days or months or seasons or years. I fear for you. Perhaps all my hard work with you was for nothing." All right, so right off the bat, we see some major concerns here from Paul to this church. And these concerns include some stuff happening with some idolatry and like the law, some idol worship things, and some identity concerns. Some people are forgetting who they were, what they've been saved from, and we also see legalism kind of pop in again, the law. We've talked about legalism a lot throughout this series in Galatians and the law, and we're going to unpack that even more this morning. And so we see that, and then right at the end there, I'm sure if you picked up as I was reading, we see Paul really concerned that maybe he's like, what's all this work? Like maybe I'm laboring in vain here, and what good did I really do? So that's what we're going to see here. So right off the bat, Paul, like I said, has got some huge concerns. He's kind of shifted to like, how can you be turning back to your old way of life? Like how, this is like the attitude that we hear from Paul, speaking very loudly from this text. Like, I shared a message with you, and you're now retreating back to the way you were living before Christ came and changed your life. I introduced the gospel to you. Your life saw transformation, and now like you're turning back. Like what's going on? So this is what we're seeing from Paul. And honestly, this sort of stuff still happens today. It's not just a you idiots moment for the church in Galatia. This still happens today, and both adults and teenagers, and you name it. And as a youth pastor, unfortunately, I see this a lot. Not in every single kid, but from time to time, we'll take them on these trips, and we'll allow them opportunities to like encounter Jesus like they never have before. For a whole week, they're in the scriptures, they're praying, they're within community, they're worshiping with thousands of other Christian teenagers, and they come, they approach us small group leaders and are like, gosh, I've never felt this close to God before. Like, this is crazy. Like, this is awesome. And then we get home, and guess what happens? They kind of fall right back into where they were before. And again, it doesn't happen with every student, but it's happened occasionally. And I think it happens to us too as well if we're not careful. So Paul is kind of in utter disbelief here. He's like I said, he's just got this attitude of like, why? I'm just confused. Like, why would you turn back after I presented a message to you that's so life-changing that it literally changed every part of your life? Like, your identity has gone from like slaves to sons. Like, why go back to that old way? Like, I just don't get it. And so this is what we're hearing from Paul here. And you see it in verse 9. Why do you want to go back again and become slaves? Like, he just is kind of in utter disbelief, like I said. So let me pause for a second. How many of you, show of hands, I'm going to get a little bit personal here. How many of you guys had nicknames in high school that you kind of wish you could forget because of like the stories that are either tied to it, or because like there's something tied to it that you're just not super proud of? Raise your hands. Okay, some of you. That's awesome. Thank you for being honest. All right, so I shouldn't be sharing this with you guys, but I will, because I know that my students are going to start calling me this now. But in high school, one of my close friends, Aaron Stockstill, he decided it would be really cool one day to just start calling me K Nasty. And there's absolutely no story behind that. Like, there's no like funny like thing that I did that, or any moment that brought up that name. He just looked at me. It's like, we're going to start calling you K Nasty, and it immediately stuck. So like my basketball team was calling me K Nasty. It even got to my family. They started calling me K Nasty. We went to state in basketball one year, and the girl I was kind of dating at the time put K Nasty on the back of her shirt. I mean, it was pretty pathetic, but it caught on pretty quick. So let's fast forward a little bit, and this will kind of age me here. I had my 10-year class reunion, high school class reunion this summer in Iowa City, and we got together, and guess what a couple people called me? Okay, thank you. You guys are catching on. They called me K Nasty. And as funny as that is to share, I think it's perfect for where we're at this morning, because who I was when I was like K Nasty, I don't believe is who I am today. I would hope that, from that time till now, I've matured. I've grown in my faith enough to where I have a better understanding of who God is and who God says I am. But it's funny because the second someone called me that, I immediately started thinking of like, oh yeah, back in high school I did this, and this, and I probably shouldn't have, and I wasn't really walking with the Lord very well. And so if I'm not being careful, then I can slowly slip back into like who I was, and I'd like to think I've moved past that. But anywho, it's so important that we don't forget our identity. And this is exactly what happened, and exactly why Paul has these ginormous concerns for this church here. And as I was studying this passage, I came across a quote that says, when we forget our identity, we have to turn somewhere. And sometimes that's idolatry. Let me read that one more time. When we forget our identity, we have to turn somewhere, and sometimes that's idolatry. And this is, again, exactly what happened. They heard the message, the good news, and they turned back to what they once followed. Again, they forgot the fact that they were sons and not slaves any longer. And you know what's kind of crazy about like idolatry and like idol worship and stuff like that is that it always takes a sacrifice. And I was thinking about this as I was studying this. So like, this is a really easy example. Money. Money is something that is, if we're not careful, we get really sucked into it. So what happens if money becomes an idol? Say we want to make more. Say we want to get the raise. We want to get the promotion. We're going to sacrifice for that, right? We're gonna leave our family at home, or we're going to not spend as much time with people that care about us, because we're going to put all of our time and energy into getting that next big raise. Does that make sense? And so idolatry is a thing that you always have to sacrifice for. But I want you guys to think of, I'm going to remind you guys like Paul reminded this church here, but what did Jesus do for us? Does anybody want to take a stab at that? Jesus sacrificed for us. Isn't that crazy? So think about it that way. So like when we get wrapped up in idols and things like that, there's a constant like, you've got to sacrifice something for it. But when we think back to like what Jesus did for us on the cross and like the gospel and the good news, like that was a sacrifice for us. And it's awesome because it turns from we have to sacrifice to he sacrificed for us. So I know it's crazy and it's easy to fall into that sometimes, but not only did they forget who they were, but they went right back into like the legalism trap as well, as we read in that passage. I'm going to be kind of jumping around, but now we've kind of transitioned into like the legalism trap, went right back into rule following. They went right back to the law, and in that specific passage, these false shepherds or teachers had come in, and they were really amazing, like at the law and the rule following, and so they had basically reminded them, you guys better follow like this religious calendar, like you better observe this day, you better observe this season, and then God will love you, okay? And so that's what they had heard, and that's what they had ultimately turned back to. Sorry, I think I got my notes switched from last week. All right, let's do that one instead. So, sorry about that. Another quote I came across in terms of this legalism thing is that rules without relationship will always equal rebellion. So as we go back to thinking about like legalism and following the law and making like doing like way more important than our relationship with Jesus, rules without relationship will always equal rebellion. And we don't work for our identity, we work from our identity. Does that make sense? So, But it's so true. How many of us fall into this legalism trap? And I'm going to really pound this home this morning because I want us to get this. How many of us, we make rules way more important than the relationship, and we start getting concerned about like church attendance and Bible reading and serving and not watching rated R movies, not stealing, not committing adultery, etc. And we make that like up here really important, and then we put Jesus like way down here. Because it becomes way more important for us to follow rules or the law instead of Jesus. But Paul is saying here, don't forget who saved who here. Like, don't forget that you were saved by Jesus and not by the law. Like, the law is good, yes. It's good that we follow the law sometimes, and it's probably good that I don't steal things and that I don't commit adultery, but that in and of itself is not what saves me. And it's Jesus. It's Jesus who saves. And so as I was preparing for this, I was reading a lot of commentaries, and commentaries kind of overwhelm me sometimes because I'm a pretty simple thinker. And so I just opened up I've got an NIV application like study Bible that my parents gave me when I was, I think, junior high or high school. And I was looking at this passage, and there was a really interesting footnote that I'm gonna give you guys, and I'm gonna kind of slow down on this because it's good to write down, and I don't have it on the screen. But these are my study Bible gave me a footnote on a couple quick examples of how legalism can steal our joy. And this is so applicable because I think we've all been there. There's going to be 4 of them. So if you're a note taker, here you go. So number 1, it makes people feel guilty rather than loved. I'll give you a couple seconds to write that. It makes people feel guilty rather than loved. So when we're thinking about like the law and doing, it's one of those things that makes you feel guilty rather than loved. The law will never love you back like Jesus will. Number 2, it produces self-hatred rather than humility. It produces self-hatred rather than humility. You're going to start hating yourself because you stink at keeping the law, and it's not going to point you to this like idea of humility like Jesus does. And then number 3, it stresses performance over relationship. This is a big one, and this is the one that we're just going to keep nailing home all morning. It stresses performance over relationships, and it's all about a relationship with Jesus, not about our performance. And then number 4, this is kind of a mouthful, so I'll read it slowly. It points out how far short we fall, rather than how far we've come because of what Jesus did for us. Let me read that one more time. It points out how far short we fall, rather than how far we've come because of what Jesus did for us. And that one's so huge too. And so let's not live in this legalism trap. And if you're someone living in that this morning, can I encourage you to just stop and just breathe, because it can be easy. In a church this size, it's easy to get caught up in I need to be serving more, and I need to be reading more, and I need to be attending church more, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. Just stop, and just look at Jesus, and just pursue Jesus, and spend time with Jesus, because those things in and of themselves are great things, and it's things that we need to help our church run successfully. I need people to serve in the youth ministry and things like that. But that's not, let's just not get this twisted. That's not what saves you. That stuff in and of themselves is not bad, but Jesus is the only one that saves. So lastly, in this particular section, we see Paul kind of defeated as ever. If you remember when I read verse 11, it says, I fear for you, perhaps all my hard work was for nothing. And if that's not the wind is all out of my sails verse, I'm not sure what is. And I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but Paul's kind of come to the end of himself here, and it's almost like a David moment, all throughout the Psalm. You hear David just lamenting, he's got this big Eeyore complex going. It kind of seems like Paul's made it there too. Have you guys ever been there? Just think for a second. Have you guys ever been in a moment like this where, Paul is just what was it even for? Like, was all this work for nothing? Maybe let's think personally here. Maybe you've got a close friend or family member that doesn't know Jesus, and is someone that desperately does need to know them. And maybe you've been praying for him for years and years and years and years, and it's just like crickets on the other end. Have you guys ever been there? Like, maybe you're just like on your hands and knees all the time, and it just doesn't seem like anything's clicking yet. And it can be so easy to get into this mindset of like, what is even the point anymore? Like, I've tried so hard. Like, I've tried inviting them to church, and I'm praying for them, and I'm trying to encourage them, and maybe they like had a hard time paying a bill, so I wrote them a check to kind of help them out. And it's just like, I'm just trying so hard, and just like nothing. And like, it can be really hard to just be like, what's the point? Or maybe you lead a small group of junior high or high school kids, and maybe there's a couple kids that they show up week after week after week after week, and you're hearing the same things over and over from these kids, and you just want to shake them and be like, it's so simple, like, it's so simple, but you just like, you need Jesus, and they just don't choose him for whatever reason, and then you drive home and you're like, why do I even bother like being a small group leader if it doesn't feel like I'm making any sort of movement with these kids? Like, why even bother? I know I've been there like way too many times. I get the privilege of driving 20 minutes home after youth group because my wife and I, we live in Winfield, and time and time again, I'll get in my car and I won't turn any music on, and I'll just like be in my head and be like, well, there was another night that I felt like was a little wasted. Like, I don't feel like I'm making a ton of movement with these kids, and like, I've been at this for like 6 years, and all these other youth groups are like baptizing 100 kids every week, and like, maybe I should just go back to Slaba and Sons and just be a woodworker and like catch stuff out of the big sanding machine and stuff like that. Maybe this is a big waste of time, like doing this with these students, because it just like, Lord, what in the world? And I'm so thankful for those moments, because in those moments, God speaks back to me, and I'm thankful for that, because I need those moments to remind myself that our labor as Christians is not in vain, and that we are making progress, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. So I've definitely been there, and it's so relatable, and like, gosh, I feel you, Paul, and like, I want to get coffee with you sometime. Like, that's what I want to tell him. So yeah, I guess you could say Paul's got his hands full here. But before we move on to the second section, I just want to lay something in front of you guys that I think we need to glean from Paul here. And I love the fact, I look up to him so much, and I joke about getting coffee with him, but I wish I could. Like, I would love to sit down and have coffee with Paul. That would be amazing. But he is such an amazing, I don't know if you guys have ever picked up on this, like as you're reading through Scripture, because Paul wrote a majority of the New Testament. Have you ever noticed how like he's both like stern with people, but also like extremely loving? Have you guys ever picked up on that? Like, he's such an amazing spiritual father and leader, because he's not afraid to like ruffle feathers. He's not afraid to rebuke somebody, but he's also there like waiting to hug them right afterwards. And I love that about him. And we kind of get to see that this morning in this second section. So we get to see how we've moved from, we have some ginormous concerns for you, church in Galatia, to some more concerns, but the tone shifts just a little bit. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. We're going to be in 4:12 through 20. So let's take a look. Dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to live as I do in freedom from these things, for I have become like the Gentiles, free from those laws. You do not mistreat me. When I first preached to you, surely you remember that I was sick when I first brought you the good news, because even though my condition tempted you to reject me, you did not despise me or turn me away. No. You took me in and cared for me even when you took me in and cared for me as though I were an angel from God, or even Christ Jesus himself. There is that joyful and grateful spirit you felt then. Where is that joyful and grateful spirit you felt then? I'm sure you would have taken out your own eyes and given them to me if it had been possible. Have I now become your enemy because I am telling you the truth? Those false teachers are so eager to win your favor, but their intentions are not good. That they are trying to start you off from me so that you will pay attention only to them. If someone is eager to do good things for you, that's all right, but let them do it all the time, not just when I'm with you. Oh, my dear children, I feel as if I'm going through labor pains for you again, and they will continue until Christ is fully developed in your lives. I wish I were there with you right now so I could change my tone, but at this distance, I do not know how else to help you. All right, so I hope you guys noticed kind of a little change in tone there. That's a big chunk there, and he still has some major concerns, right? We still see a lot of things being outlined where he's still referring to those false shepherds, and he's calling them out like because they're kind of acting like children. So there's still some concerns here, but have you noticed his vocab has switched a little? He's saying things like, "Dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you. Oh, my dear children, and I wish." So there's that like spiritual hug that I was telling you about, and I'm so grateful for that. And again, we see concerns from those people. It's just presented in a little bit different way. So Paul right off the bat is like, look at what I'm doing and like follow me. Remember like how my life was changed by Jesus and how I once followed the law as well and now I don't anymore. Like, and now I'm like back with you guys trying to remind you like, don't fall back into that. Like he's saying like, look at me, like you're going the wrong direction. And speaking of wrong direction, have you guys ever gone the wrong way on a one-way? Anybody? Show of hands. I have quite a bit, but never on a youth trip. I promise the kids are all safe with me. We never have. I think Sam did once when we were in I don't know where Sam went. He was back there. I think he went the wrong way in Kansas City last time we were there, but that was him, not me. So I did not follow him. But we were all in church fans, so it was fine. But anywho, the funny thing to me about one-ways is that there's only one way to go in them, right? There's two-way streets, but in a one-way specifically, there's only one way. And I think that's so interesting because like Paul is trying to remind these people in this church in Galatia, like there is one way and it's Jesus. Like Jesus is the way, so go that way. Like don't go like against the current. Like he is one, like the like one way, okay? So we also see Paul reminding them of when like he was first brought to them, and I personally love this portion of this text this morning. And in studying this, there's a lot of different like ailments or things that people think he was like sick with, and some say it may have been malaria, and when he got malaria he was in a specific region that didn't allow him to heal very well or very quickly, and so that's why he moved this direction and went to the church in Galatia. It was a little bit different environment and climate, and it was helping him like kind of heal in a way, and so we're not 100% for sure what the actual sickness was, but there was an ailment nonetheless that brought Paul here, okay? And so he's using that as a reminder, saying, you guys remember when I was sick and I came to you guys and it like changed my course, and in that change of course, like I got to share the gospel with you, and your hearts were changed and you were caring towards me. And he even, like the eyeball example is pretty gross, but he even like shared that he felt like he was taken care of so much by them that they would even like give them like his eye if he needed it. Like he's trying to use that to spark up some like, don't forget, like remember. So I love that Paul encourages them to remember, because I feel like remembering is a key part to like our faith journey. And so as we continue on in here, I love the fact that he used this specific story to just encourage them to remember. Like remember that time. Like remember when your hearts were set on fire for Jesus. Remember when you heard the good news and your like eyes and hearts were open, and you received it and your life's changed and you went from like slaves to sons. Like remember. And at that time the Galatians had taken Paul for granted, and really they had taken God's grace for granted as well. And so I just want to present this with you guys this morning. Like have you have you forgotten or have you lost your joy? Because for them, their joyful spirit had totally left. They almost did a 180 here. And for some of us who have been following Jesus for a long time, I think it's easy to fall in that. I think it's easy to, if you've been following Jesus for a while, to get sucked back in again to law and traditions, and I'm attending well, and I'm in a Bible study, and I'm serving somewhere, and I'm doing communion, and I'm doing this and that. But then when everything's finally said and done, and you're not serving at that moment, you're just like, you're not very joyful. Have you guys ever been there? It's just more exhausting than it is joyful. I think there's a reason here that Paul uses this as a way for them to remember. And to be honest, like I was so grateful for that as I was reading through this and preparing that this week, and because I think remembering is a key part to our faith. For me, I'll just give you a little background in my world. Grew up in a Christian home. My parents are over there sitting, smiling at me. My mom's been smiling at me the whole time, and I appreciate that because I'm an Enneagram 6 and I need told that I'm doing a good job. I'll just give you, again, my faith background. Grew up in a Christian home my whole life. Grew up basically birthed into the church. And I did this thing called Awanas. How many people, when I was little, how many people have done Awanas or know what Awanas is? Okay, so in Sparkies, which is basically the Christian version of Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, I met with other group of little kids, and we had these booklets, and we'd have to memorize scripture, and if we did it right, then they signed off, and we got a merit or something on our vest, and it was really nerdy. And I wish I would have had my mom bring the vest this morning, because she still has it apparently. That would have been so awesome, because I definitely wouldn't have fit in it anymore. But anywho, that is an important part of my faith journey. Okay, I say that because a lady sat me down, and I still remember who it was. I believe it was Abigail Hove's mom, I think. She sat me down, and Abigail was a girl that I was in high school with and did youth group with, but she sat me down and said, Jesus loves you, and would you like to give your life to Jesus as, a fourth grader, receiving that. Didn't quite understand what I was doing at the time, but decided, yeah, let's do this. But let's fast forward a little bit. As amazing as that experience was, my heart didn't really catch on, or Jesus wasn't really a priority to me until college. And so Brian, go ahead and put that picture up, this next one. So when I was in college, we had a guy named Caleb and his wife Anna. They were from another church, and they would just come and show up at Wesleyan, and they would just hang out with us. This was my go-to days. And everybody on campus at Iowa Wesleyan, thought that they just were the campus ministers. That's how involved they were with the campus. That's how much they loved the college students there, because there was I know Wesleyan's a Methodist school or whatever, and that's not my background, but there's no church stuff going on at that time when I was there. No church. There's some stuff happening, and stuff had started happening, but there was nothing when I was there. And Caleb and his wife kind of helped spark that a little bit. So keep fast forwarding. He ended up taking a group of us to this thing called the Passion Conference, and it was amazing. And I tell you this because as I remember this moment, it restores the joy in me again. Because this is where I got around other Christian college students that were passionately pursuing Jesus. I have my lanyard from that still that sits on my desk just as a reminder, because I need reminded, because I forget. I still have my notebook that I took notes at that conference. I still have that, and I flipped through that this morning. I was so encouraged by it because at that conference I got to hear John Piper and Louis Giglio and Francis Chan, and it was so eye-opening, and they walked us through the book of Philippians, and I just remember I was okay, this makes sense now. It clicked for me. And so even as I share this with you guys this morning, emotions and good emotions are welling up inside of me, where I feel my salvation is being restored. Does that make sense? My joy is coming back sharing this with you guys, because I remember when Christ first got a hold of my heart. And I know it happened a long time ago, but college was when it really took off. And I acted less like Kay Nasty and more like I was supposed to, and more like a son. So anywho, I share this because remembering is so important. And I got to share the same same story with our high school students a couple weeks back, and it just restored a joy in me that I think has been gone for a little bit. Like, I love the Lord and I pursue Him every day, and some days are better than others, but some days the joy's just not there, and I wish it was. And so thinking back on this is good for me. So let me pause for a second because, and I want to give you guys some time a little bit later during worship, but I want you guys to start thinking, for those of you who have surrendered your lives to Jesus, I want you guys to think of that moment. Like, think of that moment where Jesus got a hold of your heart. Think of that moment where someone presented the gospel to you for the first time, and it was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. Like, think of that moment when you first surrendered your life to Jesus, and I want you to go back to that this morning. And I want you to just sit in that for a second, because I think some of us need our joy restored a little bit this morning. And I know I did when I was studying for this. And so in a little bit we're gonna give you some time to do that, but I just want to encourage you guys with this reminder of it's so important to go back to that so that we don't forget like this church did. So Paul also speaks about these false shepherds and teachers a little bit more in the second section, as you guys can probably remember. And we've talked a lot about the law throughout this whole series, and I don't really need to unpack that more. But essentially, I mean, really, all you guys need to know is that these teachers are coming in and just saying, "Hey, you want to be close to God? Observe this Jewish calendar, okay? Observe this Jewish calendar perfectly, and then God will be pleased with you, okay?" And Paul's like, no, you don't have to do that anymore. Remember? You don't have to do that anymore. And so they were presenting a problem, and Paul even goes on and says, have I now become your enemy? Did you guys remember that little section here? Have I become your enemy? Because he's almost like that rebuke side of him is coming out. It seems like I become you guys' enemy because I'm putting these concerns out in front of you guys, and you're not quite getting it. And I like to think of it as, this is kind of a dumb example, but it kind of works. Think of your high school student at prom, and you've taught them all they need to know, and it's great, and they're dancing with their friends, and then proud mom comes in with the camera and wants one more picture, and the student's no, I don't even know her. I don't know who that is. This is embarrassing. Go away. And it's almost like that's the attitude Paul's getting from these people. It's like he's become their enemy, and kind of this embarrassing guy, and they'd rather follow these Jewish leaders at this time. So yeah, it's tough go of it for Paul here. And then as we kind of conclude our couple scriptures, let's see, where was I at here? Yeah, like I was sharing, these leaders, or these Jewish, these false shepherds, or whatever you want to call them, they just weren't a great example to these people, especially these people who had just heard the good news from Paul. They just weren't putting off this vibe of being encouraging at all, and it was all law and all works-based stuff coming from them, and no gospel. So I think something important here that I pulled out of a commentary to note about these leaders is that a true servant or minister doesn't use people to build themselves up or their work. They minister in love to help people know Christ better. And I think these leaders got that wrong. I don't think they were living in that at all. And I want to read that one more time. So a true servant or minister doesn't use people to build themselves up or their work. They minister in love to help people know Christ better. And Paul was doing that, but these leaders were not. And so again, as we kind of move on, as Paul closes this section, verse 19 through 20, he uses some pretty powerful imagery here, and it's a little uncomfortable for me to read. But he's using this example of labor pains. And as a man, I've never been through labor pains before, thankfully. But he's kind of referring to them as being children again. He's we are back at square one with you guys. It's as if you're still in the womb, and there's still labor pains happening. Haven't you guys grown past this? And that was a pretty swift rebuke as well. But they just forgot who they were, and they were back at square one. And so Paul had to completely start back there with them. So this morning we've covered a ton of stuff. We've talked a lot about a lot of different things. We've hit law, we've hit legalism, we've hit our identity. You guys now know that my nickname in high school is K Nasty. We've gone through a lot this morning. So as we kind of start to land the plane, there are so many things in our day-to-day lives that are going to fight for our affections and fight for our heart. That might be people, that might be circumstances, it might be things that are said to us, it might be sin. Just on my way here this morning, for those of you who don't know me super well, I drive a really old Chevy Trailblazer, and it's got almost like 300,000 miles on it, and it's probably on its last leg. And I drove by a used car dealership on the way here and saw, it'd be funny to see me in a truck. I've always kind of wanted a truck, but I'm not a truck guy very much. Chad's laughing at me, but I saw it and I was like, gosh, that'd be kind of nice to have. But anywho, so that sort of thing even this morning was fighting for my affections, like wanting a new vehicle while I should be focusing on like this message that God has for you guys this morning. My affections were stirred up for a vehicle this morning. Like, how sad is that? That's pretty sad, and I'll never get it anyways. So anywho, so it can be really easy to jump on this church here because it's so just like black and white here, where it's like, gosh, you idiots, like how can you turn from sons to slaves and then back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? How can you continue to forget who you are time and time again? Like, it's easy to jump on that and just kind of beat them down, but I think we need to examine our own lives, because if we're being honest, I think we fall into where they're at from time to time, right? It's super easy. And so I'm going to have Brian put a couple things on the screen, and the worship team's going to come out in just a second, I think. And as they're leading worship, if you guys need to, like, take a picture of these on your phone. I'm okay with people getting phones out right now and taking pictures of this, but this is what I want you guys to just ask yourselves, okay? I want you to ask yourselves these questions. Have I forgotten who I am? We're going to go back to identity. Have I lost my joy? Is there an idol in my life right now that needs to be replaced by Jesus? If I haven't given my life to Jesus, like, what's holding me back? I understand I've spent a good chunk of my time this morning like talking to the people who do know Jesus, but if you don't know Jesus this morning, and you need reminded, like, Jesus lived this perfect life on this earth and then was put on trial and crucified and died for all the sin past, present, and future that we were about to commit, and because of that, he gives us like access to God the Father, and we can know him because of that, and we don't have to carry our sin and our dirt around with us anymore. Like, if you haven't embraced that and accepted that, like, maybe just ask why. Like, what's holding you back tonight or not tonight, this morning, what's holding you back from like latching on to the best news you could ever hear? Like, what's holding you back from that? And if you want to know questions, if you got questions from this, like, come find me or Rod or Nate or Silas or anybody that you trust here, and we'll help walk you along this. But as they're closing, I want you guys to really think about this, and I want you guys to know that if you're caught like in this legalism trap this morning, and you are a person that you're like, absolutely, I'm like a doer, and I feel like that's what my relationship with Christ is right now. Just I gotta do, so that He can love me. Like, I want to encourage you guys with this, like. You're loved more than you could ever dare imagine. You are enough just as you are. You don't have to do anymore. Like, you're loved right where you're at. And Jesus is crazy about you this morning. And I have one more personal example, and then I'm going to let them lead. When my wife and I first got married, I got our love languages mixed up, and when we first got married, I was doing in order to receive love from my wife. I was making sure the dishes were clean. I was making sure there was the laundry was done, and she works crazy hours at the sporting goods store, so I was like making sure the house was clean when she got home, and there was food that we could like meal prep for, and I was doing, and that became like our first fight, where I was like, what the heck? Like, I'm doing so much for you. Like, why am I not like receiving love from you right now? And she's like, because I don't care about that. Like, I just want you to be with me. I'm like, whew. okay, like, all right, I'll stop doing this stuff then. But I'm not joking. Like, she just wants me to be with her. Like, she gets way more out of me, like, out of jumping on the couch and just saying, hey, let's watch a movie. Let's pop some popcorn. Let's watch a movie. Let's just sit and be together and be present. And she does this thing now. I don't know if she's actually in here right now. She may have. Okay, that's okay. She does this thing now that creeps me out like none other, but it's good for me, where she says, I want 1 minute of uninterrupted eye contact, starting now. And it like pains me to no end, but it's like how she feels love. And I'm going to do that because that's how my wife feels love. But I just want you guys, as silly as that is, like, can we stop like doing, and just like be present with Jesus? Like, if I stumbled through a lot of that this morning, I mixed up my notes. Like, if you hear anything, like, just stop doing and just be present with Jesus. Just take a deep breath and just like know that you're enough, and let Jesus invade every part of your life. And yes, serve here and get involved in small groups, but don't make that the end all be all. Like, let Jesus be enough, like not doing be enough. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna pray, and then we're gonna let them close us out and some music. So Father God, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for loving us just as we are, Lord. I thank you that we don't have to do more or be more or work for you to love us, but Lord, that you just do because that's who you are. And so Father, I pray that as we leave this place, we wouldn't forget that this week. I pray that we would be reminded of who we are. We're not slaves anymore, but we're sons and daughters, that we're loved more than we could ever dare imagine. And Lord, that you just want us to be present with you. So God, I just pray that would happen this week. I just pray all this in your name. Amen.
Surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Love goes through my veins, and I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I am surrounded by the arms of the Father. I am child of God. 'Cause I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Amen. You are deployed.